YouTube? This is SEL0320 representing JVS. I'm back here again for a brand new movie review, but this is not just any other movie review. This is actually an advanced screening that I got to see a movie that comes out in February. The name of this movie is Pride, Prejudice, and Zombies. This is an interesting time because whether y'all know it or not, this is Thursday, December 17th. I'll fill you in on why that's such a pivotal day pretty soon if you haven't already thought about it yet. But I was able to get the advanced screening last night, and I was like, I can't believe that we're seeing it like 2 months ahead of time. And to be quite honest with you, when I was going into the movie, I was thinking to myself, this is going to be another Abraham Lincoln, the Vampire Slayer, or, you know, those vampire parodies / comedies. And it's like, I was like, there's no way they'll be able to pull off the tangible story of Pride and Prejudice and then be able to incorporate the way that they did it as well as they did it in the actual book form. Because believe it or not, there's Pride, Prejudice, and Zombies, the actual book. This is where this actually came from. So I'll read the synopsis for you, and so you can kind of get adjusted what it's about. Even though you probably have already read the book, if you haven't, I'd recommend you check that out. Jane Austen's classic tale of the tangled relationship between lovers from different social classes in 19th century England is faced with a new challenge, an army of undead zombies. So, did they make an interesting fusion that was tangible enough to entertain me? Or did they fall flat? To be quite honest, this was one of the weirdest movies I've seen this year, but there was never a point that I wasn't entertained. Now, that's not saying this is a great movie. I'm not saying that at all. But they accomplished something that I didn't expect. They were able to keep the same elements of the Bennett family, Mr. Billingsley, Mr. Darcy, all these characters, the same names and everything, from this story, creating an interesting loving story that's good enough that you can sit there and watch, but then they add elements of literally zombies. And these zombies are kind of unlike anything I've kind of seen before, because when they're actually zombies and they get infected, their skin starts to melt off in different stages. And it's really interesting to see the way they're transformed, as well as their coherentness. This is probably the smartest zombies I think that they've actually shown on screen in a social environment, which is really interesting. But then the thing that threw me off was the fighting. So I'll go ahead and segue this into the visual scope of this and how much dedication they did to the cinematography as well as the music. The music was actually eloquently done. They did not deviate from the classic style of nuance of like classical orchestrated like score that was going on throughout most of the film. But then when there was an action sequence, that broke, and it was just interesting transition between scenes. One of the main characters, of course, Elizabeth Bennet. To be quite frank, she's intellectual, she's very abrasive, she's very cunning, but she's a baddie. Like, she is probably one of the strongest, like, well-rounded warriors in this movie, which is so interesting. I think second to none would be Mr. Darcy. And the way that they handle, like, her and her sisters, and the way that they react and interact with each other, like, they'll be all bountiful and like clean themselves up, you know, wash each other and stuff like that. But as far as their training, they'll transition from, you know, being delicate and girly to just going straight up like training. And I was like, gosh, damn, there was one sequence where they were fighting underneath, like, I think the recesses of the building that they were living in, and they were just kind of like talking, and then all of a sudden I realized, like, wait, they're not just playing hide and seek, like, they are trying to, you know, attack one another. Like, one of them just pops out of nowhere and attacks them, and then they kind of just square it off, and then the other sister comes out of nowhere. Joe had said, basically, when we were in the theaters watching this, she's like, yeah, these girls are some assassins. And to be quite frank, that's what they were depicted, and that was the most interesting part of this. Like, they come off as one of the strongest self-defense lines of this entire film, which is really crazy to actually watch on the visual scope. But as well as even like when they do like the dance sequences, as well as the sequences with the zombies, it's a perfect blend of classic and of a new age that will keep females, guys interested at the same time. So if you're a couple, this might be a better movie for you. But yeah, as far as the way they shot it and the location they shot it at, between England and different spots, I thought it was really well done, because I mean, all these buildings, I was like, wow, the scope of these buildings are just crazy. So I'm not sure how much money they actually put into this, but they did a good job as far as from a visual standpoint, as well as a cinematic standpoint, but definitely the choreography was one of the biggest things about this. They didn't come off too campy, too cheesy. Like when you see a panned out shot of like Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth fight for the first time, that whole sequence was really well done because it wasn't just sexual tension, it was emotional tension. There was stuff going on behind the scenes that you couldn't see behind their eyes, but yet they're fighting. And that's kind of hard to pull off in a delicate way without coming off too campus and too comedic. And I think they did a good job with that. So what did I think about the acting? Now, the acting was not, how do I put this? Okay, you got actors such as Matt Smith that plays Mr. Collins. You got Lena Headey that was in Game of Thrones and all these different other films that plays actually Lady Catherine. Charles Dance, that's actually Mr. Bennet. And then, I mean, the only other person I recognize was honestly Douglas Booth, because he was in the last, was it Jupiter Ascending? That was the last time I actually saw him. And I mean, none of these characters, none of the acting kind of like shines at all. I mean, I think that Matt Smith's character, he kind of stands out because he's just so annoying. And so, not flamboyant, it's just, he's not a manly man, and then his motives are just so skeevy. You just kind of like root for him not to die, but just like, man, get out of this family's life, basically. But I mean, I think the relationship between Darcy and Elizabeth was actually really well done in the sense of the way that they wrote the characters. So I think that the material that they were given, it was proper for how this was going to fit, because if they came off too serious, it wouldn't have worked. Because that's the thing, the problem that they had with Abraham Lincoln, the Vampire Slayer. But then if they went too comedic, it would have, been like some like Vampire Academy or something like that. So I think that they did a good blend. I don't think that it called for them to have that kind of range, but I would have liked to see like Mr. Bennet, for instance, what was his name? I forget. Charles Dance actually do some real action other than just kind of acting. Because I mean, I was like, you got somebody like that, like use him, like show how he trained them. You know what I'm saying? But either way, I think, like I said, I think Sam Riley and the girl Lily James, they did a decent job for the characters they were given. I mean, Douglas did a good job as well. I think he was second to what was the sister's name? Jane. So Jane Bennett, played by Bella Heathcote, she did a good job. It was just weird because in real life she's a brunette and then Lily is a blonde. So it's interesting because they kind of depict her as being like the most beautiful out of the girls. But really Elizabeth really is. So it's interesting how they changed up the hair color just for that specific moment. But as far as acting, it wasn't anything special at all. That's probably the lowest moment of this movie, is the acting. It's not bad acting, it's just for what the material they're given, that's all they can really do. Now, as far as the story is concerned, as I've said, they stick to the source material. They stick to the social status perspective of Mr. Darcy and his thought process of how he feels about the Bennet family in general. But they add a different element to it, that Mr. Darcy has an interesting backstory, as well as he has kind of a brother-like person in the sense of Mr. Wickham, played by Jack Houston. That was interesting because I was like, from the first moment you see Mr. Darcy in this, he's interacting with this random group that's just having a normal, get together, and he's like checking people to see if they're zombies. And it's like the most surprising stuff that happens in it. Very violent. Very violent. But it adds a different element to it because like they go into the apocalypse is impending because of the zombie outbreak, the dead are coming alive, so this is the reminiscent of that. Even talk about the 4 horsemen apocalypse, which make an appearance in this, as well as the inevitable coming of something else, which I'm not going to spoil. But I think that element was actually really interesting. That was one of the most entertaining parts of it. But then they also paid attention to how everybody perceived the Bennet family in general. Like, And I don't know, it was weird because people wanted to interact with them, but it was like the mother had her own perspective of how she wanted her daughters to be, and the dad was like the opposite spectrum of that. But it was actually really interesting. It was engaging. It was fun. There were funny moments. There were moments I was sitting there laughing in it. So I think that they did their job on it. So if you know Pride and Prejudice, and at the same time you're looking for a decent action film, well, not action, but a mix between thriller slash, I don't know, campish horror film, then this is a good blend. It's not too violent because it's only a PG-13 rating, but then it's not too campish because they actually do pay attention to those subtle moments of making you care. And I think that the female demographic is gonna love this film. I'll be real honest with you. I think a lot of females, they love warm bodies. And that kind of reminded me of this in certain ways. I can't say why, but I think that the females are definitely going to really enjoy this film. I think the guys are going to find it entertaining, but not necessarily something that they would really watch necessarily again. I think I would watch it again just because the last sequences that happen and everything that's going on behind the scenes about the apocalypse. Matter of fact, this is recommended. Once the film ends and you see the first roll cuts, do not leave because that's not the ending. This, to me, they honestly should have left the real end, because basically after the first roll of credits, then you see the real end of what's really going on as far as the scope of what had just happened. And I mean, to me, it plays into them probably making another one, just because of everything that happens at the end. But please don't leave, because if you leave, you're really gonna. I think when I saw the end, I was like, really? That's it? Like, you're just gonna kind of end it like that? And then when I finally saw the end, I was like, yes, okay, there you go. So only thing I can say is think of Mortal Kombat 1. That's how I'm gonna leave it at that. But definitely, it wasn't that bad of a film, but it wasn't the best. I give it maybe a 7 out of 10, and that's being gracious in the sense that I probably wouldn't have seen this any other way. But I was entertained, and I mean, for me to even stay focused in it, it definitely was entertaining because it's Star Wars week. So, as you all know, let's go, because your boy tonight, as you can see, I got mugged. I'm going to see Star Wars at 7 o'clock tonight. So, I'm going to go ahead and end off on this review. Hopefully you enjoyed this review for Pride, Prejudice, and Zombies. Stay tuned tonight, because come tonight, after everything's said and done, I'm going to be putting up my non-spoiler review for Star Wars The Force Awakens. Y'all have a blessed Star Wars week, and keep it locked. JVS, we out. You ain't gonna stop. Peace, everybody. Man, I cannot wait for tonight. Woo!